All right, let's talk about GONet projectile authority change. So that's a common thing in games where you've got a thing like this cannon and you want to shoot a little cannonball out of it, and you're a client. But you're in a server authoritative situation, and the server really kind of needs to know and dictate where that projectile is so that everybody sees it in a fair fashion. I want to just start the server and show you what I'm talking about real quick here. On the server, so we'll go over a couple of things. I just added this little guy right here to show you how much time has passed, and that time is networked. It's part of a central aspect of how GONet does some stuff. So you can see as soon as it links up, it's syncing, so that time is the same. So this is the client, this is the server. Over here I'm going to hit Alt-B, boom, and there goes a projectile. And you can see it on the server as well. But what you want to notice is as soon as I look at the client side over here, basically at the point where it's coming out, it flashes green and then it goes to a red question mark. And I'm going to show you in the code what that is in a minute. But what we're talking about here is the question mark means that I don't know who owns it anymore. It was mine, I spawned it, and then the server immediately took ownership over it and calls it mine over there on the server side. Right before we go over to the code though, I wanted to point out that this cannon that's in the scene here, there is no GONet participant on there. It's not a networked thing. It's just something that's going to be in the scene. It doesn't move. The cannonballs that shoot out of it, sure, they're going to be GONet participants. But this cannon doesn't need to be, so you really just got to think about what actually needs to be networked, and don't just sprinkle it on everything because you don't want to unnecessarily calculate stuff. But this little spawn point here at the front of the cannon, which is essentially the end of the barrel where the cannonball is going to come out, we put a spawn point there, and we did a projectile spawner script on it, and that's the one that's going to take this cannonball as a prefab, which if you look at that, that guy is a GONet participant and his position is synced. We didn't sync the rotation because you just can't really tell. It didn't matter for the sake of the demo. And it also says should hide during remote, if you open that up a little bit, remote instantiate. There's a whole long explanation there, but it's an optional thing that you might want to use, which in this case we did because it might look weird when you transition authority. So I just wanted to show you that that thing is a GONet participant because it's going to spawn, and it's going to spawn across the network, and it's going to be moving. So 2 reasons. But let's take a look at this projectile spawner code. You know what? I was going to edit this out, but I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it. This was the original GONet API in order to be able to be notified whenever a GONet participant came into the world. Either you brought it into the world on your machine or somebody else remotely spawned it and you just heard about it. But this is how you would do like an event subscription. This is still valid code. It's great. It's in GONet right now, depending on what version you're using. I'm going to go ahead and update it so that this is using an easier API for people to pick up on. So as you can see, you might not be familiar with generics, and subscribing and using this syntax for lambda expressions in here for the event handler, that might be a little bit foreign to you. So what we decided to do was make it a little bit easier. So anything that it inherited from GONetBehaviour previously can now inherit from GONetBehaviour, and then a couple of things happen as a result. There's some override methods on here. and you can see on GONetParticipant started. That's the kind of thing that we were talking about doing, and that's what this subscription was doing. So all we really need to do is we need to say, let's take that handler method that we were going to use before and then use it here instead. And now that can go away. I'm going to save that, but now the GONetParticipant is not coming in an event envelope. It's just right there, ready for us to use. Oh yeah, and this can go away because that was temporary code that no longer is needed. So basically we've got that same thing. So let's talk about the projectile itself, the spawner. All he does is he sits around in the update loop and makes sure, first of all, it's a client, because this is a client to server authority test that we're doing here. So we check if it's the client, left alt and then B, and then we instantiate that prefab that's on the dude. And basically every single one that we've done that on, we just go ahead and translate it every time. That's what keeps those guys shooting forward. But what we ended up doing here was, when this thing is spawned, which this is going to happen through this notification mechanism here, it's going to happen on the client who spawned it and on the server who is notified automatically through GONet that it was spawned. So this method body is going to get executed on the server as well as the client. But what we end up doing is we're saying, hey, for that GONetParticipant, let's make sure it's a projectile, which our cannonballs have this on it. And if it is, then we go ahead and grab that component off of it, add it to our projectiles list that we loop over here as we translate them all along the path. So we want to do that on the client and the server, just to add it into the list. And then we check if it is the server. Then we want to go ahead and say if it's not mine, which means the client is the one who spawned this thing. So if a client spawned it and I am the server, we want to say, hey, let's assume authority over that GONetParticipant. And that's the transition of authority, and that's when we come back over here to this guy and we run the server. That's what we saw when we saw the mine turn into a question mark over here on the right hand side on the client. So you see mine turn into a question mark, and over here he's just mine because this is the server. He's assuming authority as soon as he gets it every time, and that's what this code over here is doing. By the way, I did want to point out, in the update loop, it wouldn't really make sense if we were translating all of these projectiles, because like I said, both sides, the client and the server, even though the client is the one who spawned this originally, both of these are going to get called, and they get added to that projectile list on the client and the server. We don't want to translate on the client and the server. It wouldn't make sense, because GONet is supposed to be doing that network transform for us automatically, because on the cannonball, and I've changed some code here and it's recompiling, but on the cannonball itself, remember we have is position synced. So that's the automatic thing that I'm talking about. That's why we don't want to translate. So that's what this is mine check is. We need to check is mine and not is client, because is client would only make sense down here during the initial time it's instantiated. The server, once it receives this message, is going to assume authority, and an is client check wouldn't make sense here, because the server should start translating and then the client would do the GONet automatic network transform. So that's why we do is mine. Is mine is true only on one machine for every GONet participant. That is the owner. There can only be one owner. When you assume authority, this was on client ownership, and then it immediately becomes server ownership. So is mine initially would be true on the client, and the client will translate as you saw, and then the server takes authority and the server will translate, and then the client will receive the automatic updates. Alright, I also wanted to go back in here and show you that let's just go ahead and start the server. Okay, start the server, put him on. I wanted to show you what things look like over here in the editor. Okay, in the editor, so the editor, there's a few things that we can talk about here. This video, you know, it's just going to keep extending out now, but this is how you're going to learn. The video, there's a thing on GONet global context that says should attempt, we'd have to blow this out, should attempt to auto start as client is what that's supposed to say. I won't be able to show you unless I open this up. Golly. Right, should auto attempt to start as client. That's going to automatically be checked, and what that does, it allows your editor to immediately start up, and it will recognize this is a server on that same IP, and he makes this guy a client, and you can tell because he created a sample client right here. What I wanted to show you is these little guys right here. Local context. Local context is what each of a local context is instantiated as a GONet participant for every machine that's in the system right now, and you'll get a copy of everyone else's local context, and GONet does some stuff with that. But one thing that you can do is you can find the one that's yours. So since I'm a client, I'm looking for the one that says is mine. This one does not say is mine. It belongs to the authority of the server. But you can see that down here in the local context for this guy, it lists out all of the GONet participants that the server, because we're talking about the servers, these guys are owned by the server, and you can click on them like I just did, and it will navigate and select in the hierarchy. So you can see that the server owns three things. He has this directional light. For some reason I added it on there, and then he's got a global context. That's because the server owns the global context, and he's got his own local context. This guy, which is me over here in the editor, the client, my local context is this guy. So I can click and select that. So the client owns one, the server owns three. Now I'm going to try to show you over here. Can't really do that. Yeah, I can do it in the scene view. Well, I have to go to game view, dang it. So I have to hit Alt B. So what I want you to look right here under local context. I've got the local context of the client highlighted right now, and you'll see another one blows up in there. That's just another indicator that for a split second the client owns it, the cannonball GONet participant, and then the server takes it. So we can do the same thing. We'll select the server, the server's local context, and now you can see he's got all these cannonballs. And as I continue to make more, you'll see them immediately show up in the server. And like we saw, the local context for the client, they just show up for a little bit and then they go right away because the server has assumed ownership of them. Now, that's it.